For decades, Dudleytown has been infamous for countless legends, from ghostly apparitions.
It was the late 1800s. A man was traveling alone through Wisconsin on this horse, looking for inspiration. He was a poet, but one who was struggling with his art, unable to find something to spark his imagination, but he found it that day in a dark place. As he trotted down the path, he noticed the sounds first. There weren't any. It felt like he had entered a vacuum. The birds no longer chirped. The wind no longer whistled through the trees. Then he noticed how dark it was. The trees surrounding the path seemed to completely blot out the midday sun. Not just the usual darkness of a forest, though. This felt like another level, like he had almost entered a tunnel. The path beneath his horse's hooves turned to shale and broken stone, unnatural in its shape and direction. He dismounted instinctively, tethering the animal to the remains of a dried, nearly dead branch. Then ahead, he saw a ridge. He climbed. Loose rock gave way beneath his boots as he scrambled up. At the summit, he stopped breathless with sweat on his brow despite the chill that clung to the shadowy trees. Below him lay a shallow valley. Sparse remnants of chimneys jutted from the forest floor like teeth in a long dead mouth. Stone foundations clung to the earth, half swallowed by moss and rot. And yet the poet smiled. He imagined it not as it was now, but how it might have once been. A cluster of buildings, smoke rising from homes, laughter echoing through the trees. A village like any other. But where were the people now? A tremor seemed to spark. Beneath his ribs, not fear, not exactly, but something like dissonance. Like a wrong note played on a familiar song, he closed his eyes, letting the image settle, trying to hold on to his vision of his happy place. He could feel inspiration growing in him as he pictured the life here. Children skipping between homes, a dog barking, warm light spilling from windows. But then it shifted. The laughter deepened. Not joyful now, but mocking, twisted, malevolent. The children's faces grew pale, their eyes empty. The chimney began to belch black smoke, but the warmth of the fire was gone. Just soot, just ruin remained. He looked to the sky. Dark clouds blotted out what little daylight there was. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Then he noticed the chaos below. He saw a woman cradle a baby, but the infant's head fell unnaturally, skin gray, milk dripping lifelessly from its lips. A man staggered forward with a pitchfork in hand, blood pouring from slashes that seemed to have no source. His wife rushing to comfort him as he slowly died. In her arms, the trees began to twist in his mind's eye, curling down towards the village like fingers. Then there was the flaying. Men tied to trees, their skin being removed by a blade while they screamed for mercy. But he couldn't see who was holding the knife. It was just darkness, all of it imagined. Yet it somehow all felt so real to him. But in his actual reality, there was no storm, no thunder, just a soft wind brushing his cheek and a smell. Faint, sour, decayed. Not rot, not exactly, but the memory of it. Like a place where death had once lingered and refused to fully leave. He opened his eyes. The ruins were still quiet below him. He fled, not with a scream, not in panic, but with urgency. He left the ridge behind, his feet stumbling over the shale, his horse skittish as he mounted, and turned towards the road that would lead him away from those woods, away from that silence. He never returned, but he never forgot either. The poet didn't know it, but he had stumbled upon the remains of what would go on to become one of the most famous ghost towns in all of America. This is a story of generational trauma, of the struggles of attempting to start a life in an alien land. Is this a tale of curses, of ghosts, of demons, or a series of unfortunate events, and an urban legend that has gotten out of hand? Well, let's try and figure that out together, shall we? Get yourself a warm drink, dim the lights, and get comfortable. It's time to delve into the horrifying legends of Dudleytown, an apparently haunted site that is. Illegal to even visit, Welcome to the Tape Library. If you are new to the show, I will just briefly explain how I come at these topics. I always want to focus on the story first, the claims made by the people involved, or the legends that have come from a certain place. Then later we will look at potential issues with the stories and other explanations. I want to reiterate this because there is quite a lot to unpack with Dudleytown. This is a story that takes us from the modern day all the way back to the 16th century. Well, it does depending on which origin for this village you want to follow. But for now, we'll stick with the most commonly used account. The world was beginning to change. The Middle Ages had come to an end, and Europe was entering the early modern period. And it seemed a nobleman by the name of Edmund Dudley was plotting to change the world himself. The reasons behind why he did it, or how he intended to do it, are apparently lost to time, but Edmund intended to overthrow King Henry VIII. Old Henry obviously had quite a passion for beheadings. So once Edmund Dudley was captured, it seemed his fate was sealed. However, the story goes that the courts and the public were so outraged by his plot that someone at his trial shouted that they placed a curse not just on Edmund, but one that would affect his entire family line from this point onwards. With this information being spattered him, Edmund was then taken away to meet the executioner's axe. It seemed the Dudley family had aspirations for power. He was just a young boy when he saw his father executed. But John Dudley, Edmund's son, would grow up to be an integral part of the monarchy. He was the Duke of Northland and led the government for King Edward VI from 1550 to 1553. Edward was just 15 when he fell seriously ill and had no heirs. But before his death, he named his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as the next in line for the throne, a fact that his half-sisters did not like. This was intended as a way to stop the country falling back into Catholic rule. John Dudley saw an opportunity. He married his son, Guilford, to Lady Jane Grey. Some saw John's actions as him trying to seize power for his own family. Others claim he was just following the wishes of the young king. But when the king passed away, the country was thrown into a short period of turbulence. As the two sides of Mary, King Edward's sister, and Jane attempted to get themselves in the best possible position to rule, John marched to East Anglia to capture Mary, but soon found himself outnumbered and quickly
surrendered. John Dudley was arranged to be executed for high treason. But before doing so, he was seemingly forced to publicly denounce his Protestant faith and declare his allegiance to the Catholic Church, a detail that was used as a very powerful piece of propaganda for the new Catholic Queen Mary. Dudley also begged for mercy for his 5 sons. John Dudley was beheaded, as was his son, Lady Gay's husband, Guilford. Within the hour of her husband's death, Lady Grey, the 9-day queen, was also executed, but the remaining Dudley sons' executions were called off, and they were eventually released. Many members of the family would go on to play prominent roles in English society, but the reputation of the once noble family was never the same, and their power was greatly diminished. It was one of these released men, Robert, whose son William first came to America around 1630, and the Dudley lineage began to spread across the New World. In 1745, a man by the name of Thomas Griffiths purchased half a parcel of land in Cornwall, Connecticut. It wasn't the greatest of locations to attempt to build a settlement. The area was covered with an extremely thick forest and rocky land. In fact, Cornwall as a whole wasn't really suited to farming, and the entire area struggled as the years passed. The location Griffiths had purchased was in a valley surrounded by free mountains. This land in the shadows of the Appalachian foothills was a hard place to live, but it didn't stop settlers heading there. Within a couple of years, the Dudley family called the place home, and most of them had names that seemed to be designed just to torment my pronunciations. first brothers, Abel and Brazili, arrived, apparently looking for a new place to call home after returning from the French and Indian War before Gideon and Abjar Dudley came to join them. Then came Martin and Lafayette Dudley. This influx of Dudleys led to the village officially adopting the imaginative name of Dudleytown, although of course they were not the only families there. They were joined by the Carters, the Pattersons, the Andrews, and eventually 26 families began to call the area home. Dudleytown was never actually a town. The residents would use the church, town hall, and cemetery just down the road in Cornwall. But they began turning Dudleytown into a true settlement, building homes and roads out of either end of the valley, one of which was called Dark Entry Road, and referred to the almost suffocating darkness of the forest that bordered the settlement. Early on, John Andrews built a stone wall, one of the only remaining traces of Dudleytown that still remains today. Initially, it seemed to be a happy place. They knew this would be tough land to farm and a hard place, particularly in winter, to live. But the community really banded together. The details of what came first are a blur, muddled up into decades of stories and folklore. Was it the madness that came first, making people see things, hear things that weren't there, or were they there from the beginning? Many people, over the years, have reported the sounds of whispers gently traveling on the breeze through the trees. Was it these whispers that the residents heard first, or did they see them? Time and time again, the same story seems to emerge from Dudleytown. Figures in the forest, shadowy beings. Most describe them as human-shaped, others as some kind of animal. Whatever they were, they would come out at night and just watch, standing in the tree lines, observing the residents silently. But any time someone would venture deeper into the forest to try and figure out who was there would be no one. Just the eerie silence of Dark Entry Forest. The apparent curse of Dudleytown hit the residents of a small settlement throughout the second half of the 1700s, and as such details are minimal. Abel Dudley was long thought to be the first resident to fall foul of the curse. He was considered a man of intelligence and strong will, and he built a modest home by himself and lived a quiet life. But over the years, something changed. Abiel reportedly began to suffer from episodes of paranoia and hallucinations. As time went on, his mental condition worsened. As it did, he saw himself falling deeper and deeper into debt. He was eventually deemed insane and lived out his final days in poverty, isolation, and confusion. Some local accounts suggest that neighbors avoided his home entirely, citing unsettling noises that seemed to come from the woods around it, whispers in the night, shifting shadows in the corners of the eye. He died alone, but his house remained empty, at least for the time being. Monument to the first Dudleytown victim. His neighbor Nathaniel Carter didn't put much stock in these claims and purchased the house himself after Barzilai Dudley put the place up for sale to try and recover some of Abel's spiraling debts. But life in Dudleytown wasn't easy for the Carter family from this point on, and they became one of the first to abandon the settlement. He could see this place had no future, and the oppressive feeling that hung over their heads grew too much for Nathaniel. There is debate about whether the hardship of the place was what drove them away, or if there was something left over in the house from RBL's slow descent into madness. Either way, Carter and his immediate family left Dudleytown and moved to a remote region near New York, leaving behind their 13-year-old son, Nathan, who ultimately turned out to be the lucky one, at least initially. Nathaniel believed that he had escaped the darkness of Dudleytown, but it seemed a curse had followed. Not long after the move, tragedy would strike. Native American raiders attacked their homestead. Nathaniel had been out hunting and returned to his cabin to find a horrifying sight. His wife had been killed by an axe to the head. His infant son had been murdered along with 2 others who had been sick in bed. Nathaniel was subsequently captured and scalped. Their 3 other children were kidnapped and taken to Canada. 2 daughters were eventually ransomed and returned. The son, David Carter, was raised by his captives. He later married a Native American woman and eventually returned to the U.S., where he became a respected judge on the Supreme Court. Many say David escaped the curse, but the rest of his family did not. Back in Dudleytown in 1774, an unidentified epidemic swept through the household of Adoniram Carter, Nathaniel's brother. Within days, the entire family was dead. Locals feared the illness might spread, but it didn't. It remained confined to that one single household. The suddenness and isolation of the deaths
Settlement that was once there was a few crumbling walls. Dr. Clark began work on constructing his new home. But he did run into a strange problem. Anytime he contacted builders that were close to the area, they would hear where the job was and immediately turn it down. So Clark ultimately decided to build the home himself, splitting his time between working in New York and building a house in this darkened forest in Connecticut. It was completed later that year, and every summer from that point on, the 25:37, Clarks would come to the forest, spending their time hiking and swimming in the beautiful surroundings. It was everything they had ever dreamt of until the summer of 1918. They had been in the cabin for a few weeks, but Dr. Clark was called back to New York because of a medical emergency. Dr. Clark said that there was no need for them both to go and that Harriet should stay at the cabin, telling her he would return as quickly as he could. Dr. Clark would only be gone for 36 hours before returning to 26:11, the area by train, but his wife wasn't at the station to greet him. He instantly felt uneasy and quickly rushed to the forest on foot. As soon as he entered the forest, Dr. Clark knew something was wrong. The familiar, comforting feeling he had always gotten upon entering his picturesque land was gone, replaced with something darker, something suffocating. He reached the clearing where the house was and discovered that his front door was slightly ajar. He pulled it open, taking a step into the 26:50 darkened property, calling out for Harriet as he did. That was when he first noticed it, the sound. He couldn't quite figure out what it was at first, but then his senses came to him and he identified it. It was laughter, but it felt wrong. It was exaggerated, demented laughter echoing around his home. He realized the laughter was coming from upstairs, so he slowly crept up the steps, creaking as he placed his foot on each one of them. But the laughter didn't stop at the sound of someone entering the 27:35 home. He followed the sound of the high-pitched laughter to the bedroom, pushing the door open. He didn't immediately see her, but Harriet was in the room alone, curled up in a ball on the floor, staring at William as he entered, her mouth stretched to an almost impossibly wide grin as she laughed and laughed, as though she were no longer in control of her own body. The outcome of Harriet Clark appears to differ depending on who you talk to. Some say she lived out the remainder of her years in an asylum, but the more 28:15 widely reported claim is that Dr. Clark took his wife back to New York, where she would eventually take her own life. Either way, after returning from the cabin, Harriet was never the same. She would never tell William exactly what happened in those 36 hours. All that he could get out of her was one detail, that she had seen them in the forest. shadowy figures watching her. According to the legends, they were the last residents of Dudleytown, but not the last visitors. Far from it. The story of Dudleytown began to spread. 28:58. Wider once it was included in a 1938 book called They Found a Way, and it seems its reputation built up slowly over time. Initially, the stories drew local teenagers who wanted to show off to their dates and share the ghost stories of the long-forgotten village. Numerous of those visitors would go on to make reports to the local sheriff. Reports of strange screams in the forest, creatures made out of mist, some with pig-like faces. Girls were grabbed by unseen hands. One story involved a 17-year-old, 29:36, boy who had been in the forest one night drinking beer with his girlfriend. He had left her alone for a moment to relieve himself when he claimed he was attacked by something he described as a beast with blood-red eyes, clawing the boy across the face before running back into the forest, leaving him with a deep gash across his face as he stumbled back to his girlfriend covered in blood. Interestingly, this event was enough for the boy's family to move away completely from the area. Stories continue to spill out from 30:13. The forest, although many chalk them up to simple ghost stories, pranks, and urban legends, but others took it much more seriously. Eventually, sometime in the 1970s, the decision was made to remove Dudleytown from all maps, apparently in an attempt to dissuade others from visiting. This didn't stop Connecticut's most famous paranormal experts from making a trip up there with a TV crew in the 1980s, though. Despite the crew's equipment apparently strangely not working when they arrived, the account, 30:50, of Ed and Lorraine Warren's visit was published in the book Ghost Hunters. The Warrens' recounting is surprisingly grounded in a lot of ways, although they do sprinkle in some of their trademark claims. Lorraine admitted that it was hard to really know what was going on with Dudleytown, that the events that took place there had been so blurred by myths and scary stories. Ed said he couldn't say if there was any truth to the claim of curses, but they did note a strange feeling while being there, like there.